Okay, now that we have spoken about what the language myths are and the initial evidence provided by our book as to what was the debunking factors, I figured I would move along into um, the evidence that I found. And there was a key part to Language Myth 13 that I felt kind of was a good point to bring up because it can be implicated in language myth, or maybe I got this mixed up. For language myth 13, there was something that also kind of applies to language myth 8, even though it wasn't written in. And that was talking about one of the final things whenever I was debunking language myth 13 about black children being verbally deprived. It states that subordinates are always going to be looked at differently, viewed differently as far as language are going to be viewed as lesser. Given that both of these are looking at standard English dialect versus, maybe their native dialect, whenever we're comparing what's good or bad, or whether somebody's verbally deprived or can't speak or write properly anymore, I feel that it's fair to say that adults look at children as subordinates. We are usually in charge. We make the rules. We determine what's right or wrong for the most part. And I feel that in some ways that's kind of where children fall in both of these language myths. And so when I was pulling from evidence and looking for articles or videos, I came across one, and her name was Adora Svitak. It was a TED Talk that she actually did, and I believe she was 11 at the time of doing her TED Talk. And it's What Can Adults Learn from Children? And not going over her whole speech again, it basically says, that adults, that say, we act childish, need to stop. And then she goes to give some quite cunning examples of adults that are leaders that are in charge that may be acting childish as well. But, to say, is this truly the case? Okay, so I have a few notes, but they put restrictions on children and underestimate their abilities. And she goes on to name, quite a few kids: Anne Frank, Ruby Bridges, and Charlie Simpson. These, almost anybody would know who Anne Frank is, unless they're just not at the age of covering that in school. Charlie Simpson raised a large amount of money on his bike for, a certain cause. Um, that goes to speak that, our children are capable of doing some amazing things, whether they are black, whether they are white, British, American. Um, so to judge somebody just by, the standard English dialect is false. You can't say that children can't speak properly if they're touching that many people. Just because it's not grammatical doesn't mean that they don't speak properly. And to kind of tie back into Language Myth 1, when have they ever? I feel like we might have a more valid fight if somebody could point out and say, okay, well, children now, versus X period in time. But the other thing that this piece of evidence, not just from her naming the other people, but her herself, she started out with her own typewriter at 6, typed some short stories after, having an avid reading youth, and got her book published, and now publicly speaks to educators and children across the country. So if we're looking at just a small scope, she would be your evidence that children are still very capable of speaking and writing, for that matter, properly, and encouraging others to do the same. This, also ties in, I feel like, to what we saw in chapter 1 with linguistic competence, performance errors. They could be, performance errors could be what people look at as not, speaking or writing properly anymore. In chapter one, we also talked about having a written language isn't even a prerequisite for a language. There are many languages that don't have um, a written language to go along with their spoken language. And then also in chapter 8, kind of tying into 2, looking at them as subordinates. Children learn a lot from the people that they're around, and it goes into some correction errors, that adults make with children, where they'll be pointing at a dog and saying, "Oh, it's a horsey," and they're like, "No, it's a doggy." Well, we're stressing a different thing, and we're not making sure it's grammatical at the time. So just kind of looking back at it that way, I feel that carries some weight with it. And then my evidence for Black children are verbally deprived. I actually thought this one would be kind of funny. So the article that I have for Black children are verbally deprived is actually about the young woman that coined the term "on fleek." Looking in the original post, it's got some choice of words that some people would cringe at, but she's like, eyebrows on fleek, and this spurred, like, it's, I mean, you still hear of it. I mean, obviously you still hear of it now. It's a I don't know if you'd say pop culture or social, like, I mean, the video went viral of her. So, and what this article is talking about is this young Black woman that, vlogs or blogs from her mom's passenger side seat in Chicago. Had this video, it got posted on YouTube by somebody else off of Vines, and it has spiraled to having Ariana Grande sing it, IHOP using it in promotions, Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper talking about it, social media kind of jumped on it. The basis of the article wasn't so much to show, the verbal capacities, but to say that people aren't, the original person that's coming up with this isn't getting credit for it. But how amazing is, I mean, just from that standpoint, to have something that goes viral, I don't even know, viral, but they're from this, deprived background. It just, to me, that just shows that it's false, that, these high entities can value it so much. Apparently she has some capacity, that's above normal for, verbally. And just, looking back, who's able to say that that's right or wrong? At first, I'm sure somebody would say it's ungrammatical, but now it's almost, it's part of a lot of people's speech now. So you can't really say, that's not proper, that she's verbally deprived whenever she's making a new word that's, sensational now, across some of our youth, and, to be included in mass marketing campaigns. I mean, I just feel like there's a lot that could be argued there. And then, just tying both of these in, and I guess that's what I was trying to do more than anything. Chapter 1 really dove into, what is linguistic competence, and having all of these things stored inside of your head. And just because you make a performance error doesn't mean that you're not able to use, these words or this language that you have in a capacity that's, useful and right. And then looking at the language myths debunking, just because they're making generalizations based off of somebody's, I guess you would almost say like a non-native tongue, when, in the verbally deprived, Black children are verbally deprived, they're not tested using their standard dialect, like they said would be the same for Canadian French or Parisian French, and that, children can't speak or write properly. a lot of things are changing now. There's a lot of internet, and I feel like maybe some children would even say, hey, you're not as competent as I am because I know all of this computer language. And, I feel like the tables could be reversed as far as the myths go. And chapter 8 dealt a lot more with, talking about some of these theories that I've tried to tie in with it, as far as, like chapter 8 talked about imitation theory and how, they feel that children imitate what they've heard from adults, but they've also, found that in some ways to be false, because children, use the language that they're hearing differently than, what it was spoken to them. And then, chapter 8 also talks, and I feel like this kind of ties in with, in both of the language myths, how I feel that, parents kind of speak to children, or adults speak to children as subordinates. It's the way that they talk to them, that there's like modifiers as far as, when a child should know that they're being spoken to by use of like their first name. And that, can kind of play into how, children use grammar, and knowing that they're not. And the other thing chapter 8 talks about too is that kids don't know how to use grammar to begin with. So with knowing this, and I don't know why, the powers that be expect for it to all be perfect. We've had a lot of great things come out of the minds of children, specifically, the internet and all of these new words that we've never had before, words that spur, huge campaigns, or, speak to the hearts of people to raise money for a good cause. I hope you enjoyed my video. I really had a great time with this class throughout the semester, and really enjoyed diving into language myths and seeing, how the things that, are talked about in the world might not be, true, and, to give me more knowledge to kind of make my own judgments about things. It was great being in this class, and have a good summer.